All right, welcome back to the One Giants podcast as we come back in here on Sportscaster along with YouTube. And we're going to go ahead and give you continuing coverage of the New York Football Giants as we work our way through the second and third round here on a Friday night. Obviously, we are optimistic that the New York Football Giants can continue to build off what was a solid first round, the fourth overall pick, choosing to go with Andrew Thomas, the offensive tackle out of Georgia. Now, we'll do a little bit of a brief rundown here as we highlight some of the picks and moves that happened there in the first round yesterday. And then we'll start to dive in on the best remaining available and where the Giants are going to look to go here at the 36th pick, early fourth overall in the second round, about 12 minutes away from the continuation of the draft over on ESPN. So as we take a look back to yesterday, obviously no real surprises at the top. You see Joe Burrow go to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Redskins go with Chase Young. Those were the presumptions. There was a little bit of discussion around the third overall pick, maybe some trade opportunities for the Detroit Lions. Even Simmons had gotten mixed in at a certain point, but the most logical choice for them was to replace Slay after having him move on in the offseason. And they bring in Jeff Okudah. Again, hands down, best cornerback, obviously, in this draft. Also, arguably, in that top 5 bracket as far as overall talents in the draft as well. So they do a great job. And then there it is at the fourth overall pick, Andrew Thomas. He'll come in and plug in as the starting left tackle for the New York Football Giants to give you a sense just in terms of where we think it's going to go for the Giants now moving into the offseason, into next season. You're going to plug in Andrew Thomas at left tackle and go ahead and lock him in there. And then theoretically, it'll be a three-way competition on the right side between Nate Solder, who's going to have to swing around there and have a chance to compete. You're also going to have Fleming, who they signed this offseason, and then Nick Gates, who stepped in last year due to injury, performed pretty well at both the tackle position as well as on the interior, the guard at times. And then ultimately, unless Soldier were to win out the starting position at right tackle, I would assume that they would go ahead and move on from him this offseason, because whether it ends up being Fleming who wins the job, then you have Nick Gates, who's already shown the ability to be the swing tackle backup, or vice versa. And likewise, Fleming has played at both left and right tackle as well. So that's where the Giants go there. In behind them, we saw fifth overall. That's where Tua goes to Miami. Kind of expected that one there. Herbert goes to LA. They stood pat. So no trades happen here at the top. A little bit of speculation that the Dolphins were maybe trying to trade up with the New York Giants in order to get their targeted top tackle, and you would presume that it was going to be Thomas for them as well, because if not, the Giants could have traded back and maybe picked up an asset and still gotten arguably Wills, or if they want to go Tristan Wirfs, and even Mekhi Becton, who goes a little bit later. But because they did not go down the board at all that one spot, then you find the Miami Dolphins in a position to take their quarterback of the future, hopefully, who comes back from injury and has a great career. So, some nice value picks here. 7th, Derek Brown going to the Carolina Panthers. Again, considered to be one of the top 3 or 4 players this entire draft. So a nice little bit of value that just naturally falls to you. Arizona Cardinals picking up Isaiah Simmons at 8 is a very nice job for them. Obviously, on the defensive side of the ball, an area that they can certainly build on and improve. And they've already gone and grabbed themselves Hopkins from the Texans in this offseason. So the offense has already gotten better even before the draft. And now they give themselves a fantastic, versatile weapon on the defensive side of the ball. CJ Henderson maybe a bit early here for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but again, they had given up Ramsey. He had moved on over to the Rams last season, so replacing him was important. Again, this is a player that you probably saw more in the middle of the first round, but need and value, you're not going to be able to get him probably at 20 where the Jaguars again selected. So instead, they go ahead and address that issue right there. The Browns pick up their starting right tackle, they pick up their starting left tackle, having signed Conklin in the offseason. So Wills, who played at the right tackle position, though was guarding the blind side there at college, will now swing around and start the left tackle. So they've revamped that offensive line. Mekhi Becton goes to the Jets. So they take the big prospect with a high upside, certainly. So both New York teams do the non-sexy but smart move, continuing to improve the offensive line in front of their young quarterbacks. Henry Ruggs going to Vegas seemed like a very Vegas thing to do. Then what we saw was a trade here where Tampa Bay moved up and got to 13 in order to target Tristan Wirfs to make sure that they secure that offensive line in front of Tom Brady. San Francisco drops down that one spot, but does a fantastic job grabbing Kinlaw, again, one of the higher rated players, but at a defensive tackle position, not necessarily considered to be one of the higher value positions, yet they're still going to get arguably probably closer to a top 10 talent in this draft, and they pick them up at 14. And realistically, I don't know if they were really going to be looking to go offensive line, so they may have gotten a little bit of value there as well, being able to trade with Tampa Bay. Jerry Jeudy finally comes off the board, their first wide receiver to the Denver Broncos, or excuse me, second after Ruggs there to Vegas. Then you got another cornerback in Terrell going to the Falcons, CeeDee Lamb to the Cowboys. If you joined us yesterday on the broadcast, we had Keith McPherson of Talking Nets, and also a Dallas Cowboys fan. So he was pretty pumped about that. Another threat in the division to have to contend with there. Austin Jackson at 18, again, Miami has the opportunity. So while he may need to develop a little bit with 3 first-round picks, it made sense for them to start to kind of flesh this out here a little. They grab Austin Jackson. Arnett comes off the board there, 4th cornerback to get taken in the first 19 selections. Jacksonville gets on the board in at 20. They get a very nice player for themselves in Cle'Veon Chaisson, someone that we mentioned on the podcast and on here as well. Great skill set, obviously, and in a trade down scenario for the Giants, could have been a target here in the first round. Best available getting shown here: McKinney, Winfield Jr., running back Swift and Dobbins, and then Pittman Jr. considered to be one of the top 5 best available according to Mel Kiper as we move towards the beginning of the draft here in the second round. Justin Jefferson to the Vikings. Kenneth Murray, great linebacker, goes to the Chargers. Cesar Ruiz, Saints, making that choice to go ahead and secure the offensive line in front of Drew Brees, and then even beyond Drew Brees, you're still going to be talking about having incredible value there at the center position, anchoring that offensive line going forward. So a nice job by them. A couple wide receivers, Jordan Love, kind of surprising, right? Green Bay moves up to get him, to the dismay or probably to the anger of one Aaron Rodgers out there, but they get a quality prospect. Jordan Brooks, a guy that you saw early third round kind of prospect. He gets taken at the first here, and he was rising, and Seattle Seahawks jump at the chance. And you think about the Legion of Boom and just getting those valuable players in there. So they do a nice job bringing in a piece to the middle of their defensive unit. And then as you get towards the back end, Isaiah Wilson, I had highlighted him, right? I thought that, he was listed. He was listed going all the way at the back end of the second round. But as the offensive tackles start to come off the board, you have to start making moves to make sure that you secure him. So he goes to the Tennessee Titans, makes a ton of sense because, as we know, they saw Conklin exit as well. So he played right tackle at Georgia. They said that he would have swung around to the left side with Andrew Thomas entering the draft this year had he stayed. Instead, he comes out and maybe he just plugs right in and goes to work on the right side of their line. So another couple cornerbacks actually come off at the back end, and then Kansas City grabs their running back. Woo! So we burned through all that information, which, of course, hopefully was concise enough for you. Not a ton of surprise. Again, you maybe thought that there were some teams that could have gone a different direction if they would have liked to and maybe address some other needs. Like a team like Dallas, you think about, right? But when you now bring in a player like CeeDee Lamb and pair him with Amari Cooper, you're just talking about blowing the top off of things and being a real problem for defenses to handle. So we certainly are going to have some things to contend with there, to say the least. The only other one I'll mention here is, I'm trying to just, there it was, and that was Rager going to the Philadelphia Eagles, obviously also in division. So, another weapon on the offensive side of the ball for another one of our rivals. Now, when we turn our attention to who's going to be available here, as they highlight J.K. Dobbins on the out of Ohio State on the ESPN broadcast here. Listen, you have McKinney still sitting out there, quality safety. Took him in one of my mock drafts, of course, considered to be a little bit higher up the draft board in terms of positional ranking, in terms of overall ranking. 17 overall, gets a 91 grade here on the big board. So you are talking about a great value selection there for whoever takes him. And then you think about even Swift, 18. You get to Ezra Cleveland, 22nd overall grade here. So some of these guys have fallen because of positional. And then in the case like Ezra Cleveland, you're probably, it could just be a couple of developmental aspects to his game where if you're committing a first-round selection and getting that extra 5th year of control, you want to make sure that it's a guy that feels like a sure thing. So someone will still get, a quality player here. Now, from the Giants standpoint, as we move through this list, and you mentioned a guy like Blacklock there at a TCU, tremendous talent, 25th overall. As you start to highlight some of these positional rankings, you can see where teams at the top of the round are going to get value. 27th overall for J.K. Dobbins, out of Minnesota, Antoine Winfield Jr. coming in at the 29th overall. So a lot of opportunities here to bring in someone of quality. Now, T. Higgins, he ranks out as the 30th best player overall, has fallen a little bit. Was just listening to some of the conversation around him and citing that his maybe not necessarily having a lot of physicality for his size could be a concern. Not a high-end speed guy, a tremendous, large, and certainly can target that ball at its highest point, so someone can get a value there as well. When we think about the New York Giants, as we start to look through this, though, the question really becomes a couple of guys that have fallen here. So first one is 33rd ranked overall, gets a grade of 87. Positional rank is 4th best in the defensive end edge rushing category, and that is Gross Matos out of Penn State. Now, the Giants do have the opportunity here because our defensive line coach came out of Penn State as well. So he has a direct connection to Gross Matos, which means you'll know exactly what you're getting in him. So if this is a guy that he wants to stake his career on from a defensive line coach standpoint, then maybe you're going to go to bat for him, or or if it's not going to be him, it's because you have the inside scoop on how is he going to fit into a 3-4 when maybe he's better suited for a 4-3. Some comparisons of JPP, 6'5", 266. So theoretically, if I'm looking at him, I was talking about this earlier with someone as far as where he fits. I think you bring him in, and then ultimately, though, next year, franchise tag Leonard Williams, he moves on in the offseason. We pick up a compensatory pick from him, moving on, hopefully, and then Gross Matos would plug in as your every down starter on the edge there and help to lead this defensive unit going forward. It's an option. The question becomes for me, do you want to take him this early? Knowing, and not just him, because he's fallen out of the first round potentially, but do you want to take a second round early selection on him as opposed to maybe some other either values that have fallen or just another area of need that maybe you think someone matches up a little bit more, and then knowing, is he going to be a starter for you right out the gate, or are you talking about being potentially a year away? And we'll start to look through a couple of these as well to have a companion piece alongside this. And that's going to be where some of these draft prospect grades came out, kind of give you a sense of whether or not they're expected to be an immediate starter, a developmental player, special teamer contributor. In this second round, you hopefully are not taking a guy that has that type of moniker, but you can get a little bit of a sense. And then the prospect grade is great because usually it's that 6+ range that you're talking about someone you can expect to be a starter within the first couple of years. And then as you get below 6 into that mid-5 range, you could say chance to develop, show some skill sets, maybe can be a depth chart and special teams contributor. And that's fine when you get into the 4th and 5th rounds on day 3 in the draft. As we work our way through, right, let's touch on a couple of the guys that obviously are important from a Giants perspective. We mentioned Gross Matos. Then you get into a player like A.J. Epinesa, 6'5", 275. So again, this is a big player, big-bodied player, plugs in better in a 4-3 than a 3-4. We're going to be working a lot of rotations and different schemes, hybrid between a few different looks as far as our defensive unit goes. But again, how often will he be on the field to have an impact for us? So as we maybe take a look here, and see how Epinesa's draft profile grades out, we can get a sense of what the value is. 6.35 prospect grade, will be a starter within the first 2 seasons, so there is value there, obviously. At 6'5", 275, large player, ran a 5 flat, basically 40 time. Only bench 17 reps there. It may seem like, so it's a strength standpoint, probably can get a little bit stronger there as well as he worked out at the combine, obviously. But this is a bigger body, and you're talking about how effective and where are you plugging him in here. Now, if you think about the idea of having a guy like Dexter Lawrence anchoring the middle of that 3-4 unit, And BJ Hill maybe coming up a little bit short. You have Tomlinson, but is he going to be there long term? So there's a rotating cast of characters here. And as we know, Dave Gettleman, a fan of the game in the trenches, a fan of those big bodies. So potentially you can be talking about maybe he's saying we want to have that rotational unit. You can think back, though, was a 4-3 system to the Super Bowl days for the Giants, and how what were we so good at? Having OC and Tuck and Strahan and even Matthias Kiwanuka put his hand down there for a minute, right? All these players were able to rotate through and continue to give you positive reps throughout games, and in the Super Bowls continue to get pressure on Tom Brady, and that can be very effective. So you can't count this out here. And to that extent, if you want to think about defensive linemen that are listed here early on as well, you have to at least give a little bit of a nod to say it is possible that a player like Backlock is going to be possibly on Dave Gettleman's radar, depending on if you stay there. Ideally for me, you'd like to see the Giants trade back in this position, pick up a third-round asset, and give yourself that opportunity to target a couple of players here as you look in the second and third round. Because, by the way, if you were to maybe trade back to the middle of the second, I've highlighted this a number of different times, so I don't want to beat this drum too hard. But then you're saying that you can look at maybe taking a wide receiver or taking a best available defensive player. But then in the mid-third, now you can maybe package up with the compensatory 99, get up to the top of the draft, take a look at some of these other edge rushers, and still get a quality player on the defensive side of the ball. As we work our way through some of these best available, I mentioned Epenesa is there as the 8th best. 9th best is Matos. A little bit further down that list, that's outside linebacker Zach Bond. Listen, again, this isn't a knock on him necessarily. It's just about scheme fit, how often he'll be on the field. The diluted test doesn't really bother me, whether he was trying to overhydrate to put on a little bit of weight or possibly, a marijuana-related issue there. At the end of the day, what we're really talking about is that I just don't know. It's 6'1" and top end of the second round. Are you going to get value that is worth that selection? So as we can once again think about pulling up a draft profile here, and we'll again have that grade up in front of us, understand what his prospects are. Again, 6.5. Now, here's the difference with a player like this, right? You can have a +6 rating and be a guy that's you're looked at to say is going to be a starter within the first 2 seasons. For a guy like Zach Bond, again, listed at 6'2", I've seen him at 6'1" in places, 238, so not exactly a heavy guy at the outside linebacker position, that's fine, but rushing off the edge, not necessarily as big as you might want him to be. A 6.5 prospect grade, but labeled as a boom or bust prospect. So again, if you are a Giants fan or if you're Dave Gettleman, you're trying to think about securing a near guarantee, whatever position it is. And that's why a player like McKinney has to at least be in your mind. Whether or not I think that the Giants should target safety this early in the draft is one thing, but knowing that you feel like you have a fairly quantifiable commodity is certainly something that you have to take into account when you look at some of these prospects. As we just check in with our co-host Andy Makowitz. Apologies. He may join us here in a little bit as we get underway in the second round coverage. So that's the concern about a Zach Bond player. If I'm sitting here and I'm taking a look at the draft board, I want to see a guy that says going to be a starter, right? Either immediately or within the first 2 years. That's really what you're looking for here. Labeled as a starter within the first 2 years. I can't take a risk on a boom or bust prospect at the top end of the second round when you want to make sure that you're locking into quality talent. And to that end, as you work your way through, would the Giants consider doubling down on offensive tackle? As some people have said, a player like Josh Jones, I don't see that being the case either, given the bodies that you have there on the right side of the line now. If you say wanted to go that way, let's just quickly bring up a Josh Jones draft profile, and we can take a look at how he grades out and where some of those skill set issues potentially could be for him developing on the right side. 6'3", says it will be a starter within the first 2 seasons here. 6'3" prospect grade, 6'5", 319, ran a 5.27 40, 24 bench reps to go along with it. Now, me personally, I happen to look at him as being a better prospect than an Ezra Cleveland, a better prospect than an Austin Jackson as well, in my opinion. So you can be getting some real value here for a team that wants to take him. Again, listed 13th available player, but 38th overall. So you're talking about a talent that you arguably could be looking to take in the first couple of selections here in the second round, and yet you may find him available a little bit further back as well. In this instance, you'd be talking about the complete revamp, right? One of the other positions we've highlighted, obviously, is center, but unfortunately, Cesar Ruiz goes in the first round to the New Orleans Saints. If he had been there at the top of the second, again, based on when you're drafting, I may not have loved it, but he was notably the best center available, and you are talking about being in a position to shore up another position on the offensive line. As Trey Wingo will start to introduce us here, I'll just get one ear open to make sure that I hear any information that they're sending along. Quick little adjustment. So as we prepare to get underway here in the second, we'll continue to try to give you as much effective information as humanly possible before we dive in. Moving down the line here through some of these options, a wide receiver prospect like Pittman Jr., 42nd overall. For me, Logan Wilson is a guy that I really like. 47th ranked overall on the board right now, listed as the 21st best available prospect. But again, for me, I really like the idea of maybe bringing in an extra body on the interior of that defense. And you're talking about having a supplemental asset when you talk about maybe Lorenzo Carter. He has this third year to try to really get himself going. Ryan Connolly coming back from injury. Obviously, you got Blake Martinez, but he's not going to be there long term. He may just find himself on a one-time 3-year contract. So where do you go on the back end of that? Probably too soon to be taking that kind of position. I do just want to highlight a player that I think has a very high upside. He's listed as being a starter within the first 2 years of his pro career. When we talk about this, I would keep an eye on safety positions for the Giants here in terms of value. If they get a chance to trade down, I would absolutely love that because, again, then you start to speak to some of the opportunities that you're going to get. Getting back into the middle of this second round, where we're talking about, again, 28th, 29th, 30th best player available. How about a guy like Shenault Jr. out of Colorado, right? Here's a guy that's only 6'1", 227, but has a very high upside for himself as well. I don't think the Giants would go that route in the second round, but the flexibility that you're going to get is certainly something you have to consider. One of the other guys in a trade down scenario for the Giants would be a player like Julian Okwara out of Notre Dame. He comes in at 6'4", 252. So a little bit more of that end edge rusher kind of scenario for the New York Football Giants. And if we want to, again, try to dive in on that, as we try to type and talk, which I cannot accomplish evenly enough, as we try to take a look at where his NFL profile comes in at, 6.3 prospect grade, will be a starter within the first 2 years, 6'4", 252, did do 27 reps on the bench, but was saving himself for his pro day, and I don't know if he ultimately ever got an opportunity to put that on tape. So didn't run the 40, but again, when you talk about a player that looks to be projected as a starter within the first 2 years, you have to feel comfortable about the idea of if someone comes knocking, a great chance to go forward and give yourself an extra asset in the third round, knowing we gave it away for Leonard Williams. So these are all things to keep in mind at the top of the second. My suspicion is that you can anticipate the Giants are going to just stand pat, allow the board to come to them, and get probably tremendous value here, certainly. But for me personally, I'm hoping that this is a situation where the Giants get extra value, because if you go safety here, though, listen, McKinney, I'd be pretty excited about to add into this defensive unit for sure. It would allow Julian Love the flexibility to move down into the slot corner position and compete with some of the slot receivers. But my preference really would be to get a couple extra assets. And what I'd like to come out of when I think about being at the top end of the fourth round or at the end of the third round if we can drop back and get the extra asset, then I target maybe a wide receiver here in the second. I've been high on Chase Claypool. I really think that he brings a lot of what you would love to have right now, as the Bengals are on the clock here with wide receiver, edge, linebacker, guard, and center listed as their top 5 needs. So we'll see what happens here. Safety not among them. So you would expect that a couple of safeties are certainly going to be an option here for the New York Football Giants, but we'll see if they go to wide receiver. Maybe they get a great opportunity to pair T. Higgins up with Joe Burrow, their newly selected franchise quarterback from day one. And we'll check in here to see. I think Andy may join in with us. And as you might think, in these quarantine times with a wife and a young child, they're sitting down to get a little bite to eat here. I think probably after little baby Roy has just gone off to bed. So we'll see if Andy's able to check in with us a little bit later. In the meantime, as we come up on under 4 minutes to go, excuse me, on the clock here for the Cincinnati Bengals, we continue to think about where the Giants might want to go here. To highlight beyond Julian Okwara, only other players that you can maybe think about, we talk about a Lloyd Cushenberry, 6'3", 312 center position, and this is really trade down opportunities for the New York Football Giants. And then it's Darrell Taylor. And I've said, I love this guy, 6'4", 267. He does just enough of everything here where you get kind of that nice little hybrid player that can still go sideline to sideline for you, can still provide you tremendous edge rush presence as well. I really love him, and I'll go ahead and get that draft profile pulled up to go over it here. But when you talk about a player like this, if the Giants were able to, and I'll make sure that I get the right Taylor pulled up here, because there's a couple in this draft at both the defensive and offensive side of the ball. So we talk about the profile here for Darrell Taylor. Again, this is a guy, will be a starter in the first 2 seasons, 6.3 rated prospect profile, 6'4", 267, 33-inch arms, 9 3/4 hands. And when you talk about his bio here, now he didn't go at the I don't know if he went to the combine, not pulling up those stat lines here at least, but just to give you a brief review as I'll take my eyes down for a second. But listen, he had 10 tackles for a loss, 8.5 sacks in 2019, 46 total tackles, and 4 pass breakups in 13 starts. He was also the biggest threat to attack the backfield from the linebacker spot back in 2018, led the defense with 11 tackles for a loss, 36 total stops, including 8 sacks, while forcing 3 fumbles. He has shown promise going all the way back to 2017. He started 7 of those 10 games as well. This to me is a player that can, again, as you're reading from those stat lines, right, can give you pressure on the quarterback, can contribute in run defense, can also bat down some balls, so dropping back into some zone looks potentially. If I'm sitting here realistically saying, I've been high about a wide receiver potentially, I've been high about Claypool. If I'm going to tell you what I want to come out of the second and third rounds with, if I had to make a choice of one player, it's Darrell Taylor. That's who I think that the Giants should look to target and achieve here. Now, the pick is in for Cincinnati, and you can make the case that Bond or Matos, if they fall there, maybe that value is there. But again, I would make the argument that you're better suited to trade back, pick up the asset, and look to get Taylor there, whether it requires you to package up a mid-third round pick that you get in a trade down, as well as the fourth round selection, and then dive into the top of the third to make sure you secure him. I think that that's a play worth making for the Giants. I don't know if that's in Dave Gettleman to one trade down. I think he would trade up to make sure that he secured the player. It just depends on where does he stack up on their board. And when we talk about, again, the big board scenario, this is a 39th best player. So when you think about him and why losing that third round selection there to the Jets in the Leonard Williams trade is an issue is because 39 selections starting at the 33rd pick here, you're talking about being in the mid-70s, and that's right in the wheelhouse for the Giants. If you were picking after what would be the first round, you get compensatory picks lined up as well. So you're talking about being on the board at 68th overall. That's a perfect area to make that selection for the New York Football Giants. Unfortunately, you don't have it. Doesn't mean that you can't package and get there, but will you make that move? So T. Higgins comes right off the board here as the pick is in for the Cincinnati Bengals. So just like that, T. Higgins comes off the board. People felt like he had fallen heading into the draft. So, maybe it was going to be that back end of the first round. Instead, finds himself here at the top of the first. The Bengals make that move to bring in a weapon to pair up with Joe Burrow. Smart move, obviously, from that standpoint, because you want to get some weapons there. AJ Green, over 30, obviously coming off a handful of injuries as well. So you obviously know that you want to give some depth and a nice target for Joe Burrow to take a look at. So as the Colts come up, and immediately that pick is in. So no hesitation here from the Colts. What would I think here? That they're going to go maybe with a safety here. Maybe McKinney is that nice pick for them. I'd have to do a little bit of a look here just in terms of where we stack up and what their biggest need would be. So we'll try to take a quick look inside here and see where we fall. The pick is in for them. I don't know if they will highlight what their biggest need would be. So cornerback, D-line, offensive line, QB, wide receiver for the Colts. So if I'm thinking cornerback or defensive line, then I start to take a look inside the best players available here. And you think about a couple of cornerbacks that are there at the top of the second. And then you can also think about potentially that defensive lineman we had mentioned in Ross Blacklock. So Blacklock could be on the board here for the Colts. You could also potentially, if I'm thinking about cornerbacks available, they'd have to reach down a little bit in some regards. But, Trayvon Diggs is there. So if you're thinking about a player that has a high upside, I believe he's I want to say brother of Stefon Diggs. Could be cousin, but I'm pretty sure it's his brother. 39th player overall on the rankings for him. So right in the wheelhouse there, picking at 34, and obviously would fulfill one of their needs. So I might tend to think that that's one of the two directions they're going to go if they wanted to maybe jump on Ezra Cleveland and consider the idea of grabbing him up for offensive line depth. That's possible, but my inclination, with not a ton of research put into it, would be to say that the Colts are maybe going to take a look at a defensive player, and if they wanted to reach down, because after Diggs, you still have Jalen Johnson out there as well, but you start to move down into that now third round area if you're the Colts, and whether or not you'll be able to secure that need. So we just do a little bit of communicating here. Up on the screen is, of course, the ever evolving personality of Roger Goodell. That can't be the way you want to describe him. But here you are at the top of the second round. Second selection's in, and the Colts will go. They go with Michael Pittman Jr. So listed as a need there. So just like that, back-to-back wide receivers here taken at the top of the second round. So you start to think about, where are these players going to start to roll off the board as we move through? I mentioned again about weapons and where players are going to project to go. All of a sudden, you just think about where some of these players are and where you can expect them now to go. Pittman Jr. was not that high up on the top remaining prospects, yet the Colts have made that selection. They obviously had a need, as the now Detroit Lions will be on the clock here at the third pick, 35th overall here in the second round. You have a guy like T.Y. Hilton, obviously, but still some needs in behind him. So interesting to see that they went there. And now as you start to feather down this list here, no matter who you are, if you're thinking about targeting, he was, Michael Pittman Jr., listed there as the 16th best available player on this board. So, you dropped down there, and with some needs potentially ahead of him, you made a choice. And we've talked about this a lot. These wide receivers that maybe you're saying, well, it's a very deep wide receiver class and you can get talent later on. But now what you're seeing is, because it is talented, you're not going to get Michael Pittman Jr. in the third round. So now you're going to go ahead and make that move in the second to secure a valuable weapon for your quarterback out there in Indianapolis. Now, I'm curious to see here with the Detroit Lions on the board. Listen, my head's spinning a little bit here, because if I was the Giants again, and if I'm thinking about getting a weapon, now I start to consider that idea of with the way these wide receivers are going. Again, 16th best available was Pittman, and then you're talking about what may feel like a long ways behind here, but we'll highlight all of them that come up. You're talking about then Shenault Jr., but not a great fit, and then 29th best available player would be Chase Claypool. So this to me, I would love it to be the case from my own perspective. But what you have to start to think about is then even though like a Shenault Jr., 28th best available player listed, but you just saw a guy that was 15 spots back there at the wide receiver role. He jumps up that high. So theoretically, a Shenault Jr., a Chase Claypool, and if you want to keep moving down that list, even a player like KJ Hamler out of Penn State, you're going to be talking about these guys taking a little bit of a jump up if someone is really looking to target them. The trickle-down effect there as the pick is in for the Detroit Lions. Matt Patricia sitting there with his son running the draft from his home. Happy to see the youngster back at there. They had a nice little dap last night after the third overall pick with Okudah. So now that you sit here, though, with the Giants just seconds away, really, from being able to get on here and get into the action, I just don't know. If you're going to target someone like that, then now you see these guys jump. And this doesn't have to be whether or not the Giants take them. I just think you can potentially expect wide receiver needy teams, if they're looking to address it this round in the first half of it, all of a sudden you could see a big surge from a few of these other wide receivers coming up the board to whoever may be looking to take them. And if we come back inside the best available here, because I highlighted those two wide receivers at 28 and 29 and Shenault Jr. and Chase Claypool. Back over on the immediate board, though, beyond Xavier McKinney, who, by the way, could fall nicely to the Giants here. Potentially, maybe the Detroit Lions want to continue to bolster their defense as well. So it'll be interesting to see. But what are the other wide receivers that we see? Just as a matter of fact here, Denzel Mims is a guy that could take a big jump up the board, listed 18th best, but obviously he's going to surge now possibly for a team that needs him. That's the only one listed here. So in terms of wide receivers on the board, there's only one other player after you talk about Mims. Then it's going to be a wide receiver like Shenault Jr., and then you get into Chase Claypool. And again, Denzel Mims might certainly be a valuable selection here at 6'3", 207 as well. So a lot of opportunities here. Could go completely away from this for sure. But as the Detroit Lions come in and Roger Goodell continues to try to be playful with the screen behind him and some of the fans that are there cheering and getting excited, here it comes. And it is running back DeAndre Swift out of Georgia. So interesting choice here for the Detroit Lions. They kind of go two ways here. I would have expected maybe primarily that they would stay on the defensive side of the ball to help shore that up, but instead they get a fantastic offensive weapon, a fantastic player to have in behind Matthew Stafford now. And if I come up here, remember we mentioned Swift before, second best available player on the board, 18th overall in terms of value. So you are getting tremendous value here as they highlight Darren Swift, DeAndre Swift's father, who's an absolute beast in the gym as well. So you know what you're getting with him. He's going to be a workhorse for you. Fantastic opportunity there. Pick is already in for the Giants, by the way, so zero hesitation. There's no way with the pick coming in that quickly that I would think that the Giants are going in the direction of a wide receiver at this point. Just too quickly went in. That means they saw their guy, they wanted him, could be McKinney. As we just communicate here quickly on the side. But listen, as they show these highlights of this just beast of a running back in Swift, the Giants pick is already in. You can talk about where their needs lie: outside linebacker, inside linebacker, cornerback, safety, wide receiver. That's how they're lining up some of these, and you can make your argument about any which way that you want to go. But they clearly saw a guy that they liked. They clearly didn't have any concerns about trading down, automatically in. So be interesting to see here. And that's why I assume it's not going to be a wide receiver. And that was an outside shot, optimistic maybe by my standards. But I assume that when you look at this board, you're talking about value meeting need. Safety just seems like a little bit of a reach here. Tremendous value with McKinney. I tend to look at a Gross Matos, again, inside track there, and maybe that gives them an opportunity here to shore up a defensive need, build towards the future. The only concern that I have there, again, is that you're talking about a situation where the Giants are bringing in a player that really plugs in on the front of that defensive 3-4, as opposed to being able to work off the edge. Best available right now, as they talk about McKinney, let's see there. And then it was McKinney. I think it was Winfield Jr., Dobbins. And then you got the tight end, Kmet. This is based off of Mel's big board. Zach Bond, Marlon Davidson as well listed here as they move through the 6th and 7th best. So as we prepare for, as it looks like we're going to take a little bit of a commercial break there. Grant Delpit, Jonathan Taylor listed at running back there. The top 8 for Mel as well. But again, my inclination is probably Matos here. I'd like him to stay away from Bond. I'm happy to take Matos. I think that he's a better prospect at that position for what he comes in at the NFL as opposed to taking a look at maybe a Bond or even a guy like AJ Epinesa. Again, big player there as well. He's more in the vein of a Gross Matos. I'll be curious here. Listen, technically speaking, when you look back at Thomas getting selected, while you can argue about who was the best offensive lineman there out of those top 4, some people had him shuffled. I don't think I was just speaking with Scott Mason from the Play Like a Jet podcast. He was saying they get Mekhi Becton. He had Thomas listed behind Wills. That's okay, right? No matter what you really started to think was you're ultimately talking about getting a player that you're going to be able to plug in for the next decade. And I think that that's kind of the consensus about any of these guys. And you can say, well, maybe, Becton's going to need a little bit of work, but still going to be there for you. Likewise for Tristan Wirfs, you may end up shuffling around somewhere else on the line. And that's about, again, meeting the fit plus the need. So you couldn't go wrong there. But the Giants did take a player that by all accounts, a lot of big boards had a little bit behind some of these other players, at least at draft point. Coming into the combine, pre-combine, Thomas was considered the consensus number 1. So they stuck to their guns and made that selection. It'll be interesting to think about if it is one of these players that's fallen, though typically when you see guys fall, how far do they go before it feels like value meets your selection point? Or is there someone in behind them that they truly like and they were hoping they get a chance to take? Did anything happen in terms of being impacted by the couple of wide receivers that went at the top? Again, McKinney, Swift went off the board there. Then you're talking about Ezra Cleveland, Backlock certainly as having an offensive lineman, then defensive tackle. Dobbins not going to be an option there. Epinesa, Gross Matos, as we've been highlighting here. Beyond that, then you're getting a little bit further down where maybe you feel like a trade would make sense for them. It just, where do you want to go here? Because as you move down this list, you get a couple of defensive tackles and cornerbacks mixed in there, and I don't see that being the case. Listen, you want to talk about outside linebacker, inside linebacker being needs? Maybe you could consider that idea of saying if Logan Wilson was on their radar, is this where they want to target and pick him, knowing how long we're going to have to wait now, right? Can the Giants package up and get back higher in the 3rd round? Certainly. I would take 99 and 110 and try to get myself up that board into the top 20 round, maybe the top 15 of the 3rd round, certainly. But as of right now, that selection's been made. Joe Judge in his fully windowed bunker there, while Dave Gettleman, and just to clear it up in case you didn't know, I know people were saying some things in regards to him wearing that mask. It's because they do have a tech guy on site with Dave Gettleman, making sure everything runs smoothly. Dave Gettleman is obviously coming off of cancer treatment over the last couple of years, so he is for both an age standpoint and a health standpoint, some potential risk there. So because of that, that's why you see him using his mask there. At the very least, it's promoting social distancing and just being safe, right? So nothing really too much to be concerned about there. And let's see here. It looks like they'll be announcing it from the Javits Center in New York City, the 104th Military Battalion. And the pick comes across with an announcement here by a handful of first responders and frontline individuals that have been helping through the pandemic. And we will see what the pick will be here. And it's back into Roger Goodell. So they went out there to the Javits Center to give a much respected salute to some of the people working so hard to help during these difficult times. And here comes the selection for the New York Football Giants, 2nd round, 4th pick overall, 36th in the NFL draft. The New York Football Giants select Xavier McKinney. So they go safety. They go safety here. Listen, again, you want to talk about value meeting need, and this is what we're saying. As I just give a little bit of a burst here. Sorry. Xavier McKinney is the selection. Listen, there's a lot to like about this. We highlighted it at the top, right? When you talk about a player like Xavier McKinney, I mocked him going to the New York Football Giants a couple of different times. I said you can say you want to push it off a little bit as far as where you want to look. We'll listen in on some of the breakdown of him here in the background as well. So as it shows some highlights here, does a great job jumping down into coverage, breaking up a pass on a quick, smaller wide receiver out of the backfield. We'll highlight him here once again, stepping down to the box and then ranging inside, cutting back outside to break up a pass, looking for the tight end off the edge. Here, once again, down in the box, working off the edge, going to sneak it on the weak side, beat the offensive lineman to the punch, get that strip fumble sack on the quarterback. One more time here, playing out there in center field, reaches up, great instinct, watches the quarterback's eye, steps right into that pass, runs it back in for a touchdown. So what have the New York Football Giants accomplished by doing this? They go ahead and give themselves flexibility with Julian Love. Maybe he can go down to that slot position for them. Now they back up Andrew Thomas, offensive line need. They get a great value selection here. Again, I think you're talking about plugging in a player that when you look at him, you're saying he was ranked 17th overall in this draft. 17th overall prospect in the NFL draft. The Giants get him nearly twice as deep behind there at the 36th selection, almost a little bit more at the 36th overall pick there. The Patriots selection is already in here at the top of the second round for them. But again, we'll pull up that draft profile for an Xavier McKinney. This is, to me, I can talk about where I thought the Giants could go, or maybe I thought I wanted them to go. One of the things, again, that I'll say, I highlighted Gross Matos and some of these other possibilities. The bottom line for them was when you look at those players and they start to fall, again, about need fitting the scheme. I don't think to say you have a guy like Leonard Williams there at the edge position, you already have BJ Hill, you have Dexter Lawrence, you have Dalvin Tomlinson, almost an embarrassment of riches that even though you're talking defensive line, defensive end, but you've got a lot of bodies in that room already. So it would have been a little bit deep there possibly to make that kind of choice. Meanwhile, you're getting a 6.38 rated prospect in Xavier McKinney, safety out of Alabama, 6 foot, 201 pounds, will be a starter in the first 2 seasons. He'll be a starter the first season here for the New York Football Giants. They'll pair him back there with Jabril Peppers, give themselves a great little tandem on the back end of this defense. Listen, ran a 4.63 40, not the quickest, but he does a mix and match scenario. Can come down to the box to help you out potentially against the run, but can also pick up running backs, tight ends coming off the line as well. So a lot of things to like about him, and we can even give him a little bit of some information here on the back end if you would like it. McKinney started all 13 games in a third-team Associated Press All-American, first-team All-ACC junior campaign, SEC junior campaign, excuse me, had 95 tackles, 5.5 for a loss, 3 sacks, and finished among the nation's leaders with 4 forced fumbles. Also intercepted 3 passes, broke up 5 others, and blocked a kick to go along with it. So, listen, he does the well-rounded thing. This is what you talk about, arguably a Swiss Army knife, to use the cliche term, for the New York Football Giants. You're going to be able to move him around the field, use him in a lot of different areas, and again, gives you some additional flexibility here as far as being able to take Julian Love and now shift him around as well. And these guys can be mix and match based on down and distance to go along with that. Communicating quickly here with co-host Andy Makowitz. So now, again here, the other one we talked about, Panthers pick is in. Gross Matos will be their selection. So as we've talked about, right, now the ties will happen here. But because you had a coach on the defensive line in Penn State, knows Gross Matos intimately, doesn't mean he can't be a solid player, but I'm sure that there's communication going inside the building there where you say, hey, what are we talking about here? Where is the value on this player? Is he worthy of this selection here? as you see these picks really coming in pretty fast and furious. Dolphins have their pick come in here already now at 39. So as of right now, the Giants will be waiting a long, long time. But knowing that you had an inside track on a player like Gross Matos probably makes it easier to make that assessment. Now the question becomes, if you're the New York Football Giants, where is the next position of need? How do you look to address it? If I'm reading the way that this has gone so far, you'd probably tend to think that you're going to be looking at a center possibly being available. And when you talk about that, that's when you're moving into the class of Lloyd Cushenberry, 66th overall ranked player. So, if he's going to fall back because of his position, that's a possibility. Second best on the board. Third best, 89th overall, would be Tyler Biadasz. Now, I'll quickly pull up those prospects for these two players here. And we'll take a look here as Mel Kiper highlights. Not the fastest, not the most durable in Gross Matos, but certainly can be disruptive. And again, he feels like the kind of player that the Patriots take and really get the most out of him. That Van Noy, style player that probably really pans out for the New York football. For the New England Patriots. All right, now let's take a look here as we talked about that draft profile for Tyler Biadasz. See if we can get it pulled up here. Here we go. Tyler Biadasz, coming out of Wisconsin, 5.97 grade. Does not get tagged with whether or not expectations are for a boom or bust, or is it potentially going to be an opportunity where this could be a starter within the first 2 years. Combine, nothing doing there as well. So there's not a lot of information. 6'4", 314. Obviously, now he is listed technically as an interior offensive lineman, and sometimes that's nice to know that he's a guy that could have been playing guard at college and then kicking inside to center, because you get a little bit more strength out of him, and you get a little bit longer arms as well, typically when they make that type of transition. Listen, we can take a look inside some of the notes here and just see what we can get on him. Strengths: 3-year starter at a premier rushing attack in the Big Ten, able to unlock flexibility in hips, accurate quick strike hands into first contact, vice grips in clinch up, so does a nice job locking into a defender, extends, rides, and finishes the block, repeatable technique, works well in double teams, smart angles to second level with ability to adjust in space, plays with body composure and contact balance, so keeps his legs underneath him, doesn't get thrown off and get caught off balance and pushed back potentially into the quarterback, shows some recovery footwork to push defenders past the target, wide and controlled up to second level, identifies and communicates protection duties pre-snap. So communicator, leader of the offensive line there, obviously. However, does not generate much push or drive as a blocker. Base block, loss positioning to power, needs to be stiffer, to secure the block before the climb. Additionally, core power is just average. Faulty anchor allows pocket breach by power rushers, needs to stay back and punch with posture, leans and falls off balance against moving rushers, so maybe not as quickly getting over and picking up those guys as you're talking about potentially running some of those stunts and having linemen rotate underneath each other on the defensive side of the ball, and then gets overextended in lateral protection help. So this is what we're talking about, where he's going to get maybe lost out in space a little bit potentially from the offensive line perspective in that center of this line. Now, we can talk about Lloyd Cushenberry here quickly. And really, I think, if I remember correctly, my concern a little bit here is going to be that his prospects as far as starting, I don't know if he ended up getting labeled as one of the boom or bust. Let's take a look inside. Now, 6.32 rating, will be a starter within the first 2 years. 6'3", 312, ran a 5.27 at the combine. Not the most concerning thing here. Let's talk about strengths and weaknesses, where he's powerful with good core strength and outstanding long arms. Talk about that arm reach, 10-inch. I believe they listed there, what was the arm listed at? 10 and 3/8 inch hands, 34 and an 1/8 inch arms to go along with that size and weight. Now, he's powerful with good core strength and outstanding long arms, usually first to the frame in the run game, possesses core power to stalemate the base block in the run game as well, so you can be depending on him in the running attack, which is nice to think about when you have a player like Saquon Barkley behind you, an area of needed improvement for someone like the offensive tackle we took in Andrew Thomas is going to be a little bit in pass protection. But what you're talking about is potentially getting yourself a dominant run left tackle, a dominant run first center as well. Swings his hips into wall-off positioning for A-gap runs, sticks early, stiff jab into the frame and nose tackle to work the extension, sets up in the pass protection with great posture as well. He keeps his head back and chin tucked through the rep, plays with excellent hand placement in his punch, good grip power and core strength to anchor against power rushers, controlled climber when working up to the Mike linebackers. So that means you can get into the second level potentially and have him take on a linebacker as well to free up Saquon to get into the secondary level, and then a smooth block-to-block pass-off when handling the twist as well. So in talking about Biadasz versus Cushenberry, here's a guy that can shift and pivot underneath some of those twists and still pick up that secondary mark as the guards grab the other. Limited range as a run blocker, so don't know how far you can expect him to maybe move in these run schemes. May need to play smaller spaces for maximum effectiveness. Needs help from guards to create movement at point of attack. Loses positioning at times against the length of the defense. Inconsistent keeping the block pinned and out of tackle. Oversets as a lunging pop when working out of the gap rushers. Cross-face rush counters give him some trouble. Allowed too much pressure around his edge and needs to keep his feet from deadening in mirror phase. So there are some things to be concerned about there. If we were going to give you a comparison here, let's go ahead and just bring up the player that went there early in this one. We'll see if we can get the selection there from the New Orleans Saints late in that first round, where they were able to secure themselves a starting center. Had to feel pretty good about it, obviously. Give me a second here to pull up the information as we continue to run through where you are talking about Robert Hunt, the guard out of Louisiana, going to the Dolphins. So the rebuild of their offensive line, Austin Jackson in the first, then you come back here, pick up another valuable player in Robert Hunt, and they're doing it right? They're going to fix this offensive line. They drafted their quarterback of the future, and now they can let him get healthy, get mentally ready and prepared. And now that somewhat more opened AFC East with the Patriots losing Tom Brady, obviously, now you can battle the Bills. This could be a very different looking AFC East competition coming into this year. So as we quickly take a look back there into that first round, let's get Cesar Ruiz's draft profile up here. And just briefly touch on what it looked like relative to the first overall versus the these other two centers that we're highlighting here, possibly for the Giants. 6.40 grade, excuse me, will be a starter within the first two seasons out of New Jersey, by the way. 6'3", 307, has 11-inch hands, absolutely massive hands, and 28 reps on the bench at the combine. Let's just talk about the weaknesses first, because we saw how that list started to fill out there when we're talking about Cushenberry and also about Biadasz. Frame appears to lack desired width, could benefit better acceleration and thump into first blow. Needs to work on steering blocks into position. Positional blocker with average face-up power and could struggle to set a shallow anchor against NFL bull rushers. But that's the length of that list there, right? Everything beyond that, nothing else to really complain about there. And then he has a very nice, excellent snap to step quickness, Waits for defender to declare before capturing and securing the block. Consistent to run feet through double teams and down blocks. Plays with bend and leverage, etc., etc. But the point being is here, far less negatives to sort through for a player like Ruiz as opposed to these other centers. And that, again, is one of the reasons why I would be hopefully looking at the New York Football Giants to stay away from the center position, maybe give yourself an opportunity and go ahead and look inside later rounds potentially and move on from there. As we take a look there, Texans pick is in, and it is Ross Blacklock. So a very nice selection there for the Texans. Obviously, a quality player that, again, has fallen down this board a little bit. The Giants, as we'll just recap here briefly, and then we're going to take a little bit of a step away. Long ways to go before the New York Football Giants will be back on the board as it stands right now at the back end of the third round, 99th selection overall. They've taken offensive tackle Andrew Thomas in the first round at the 4th overall selection. We backed it up with defensive help in Xavier McKinney. And if you want to make the case as far as where these players were ranked, we got ourselves 2 top 20 talents in the NFL draft between the first and second rounds. We get to go ahead and head into the season feeling like we've improved the offensive line play here, obviously, and we've also given ourselves a valuable asset in the defensive side of the ball, where if you're the Giants, really, what did you want to do? In the offseason, you took a look at guys like Mackerel and Tina, so you upgrade, depending on whether it's marginal or not, but you upgraded the linebacking core. You went out and got Bradbury. You upgraded the cornerback room. Now Bradbury will be the number 1, at least going into this season. Baker gets to play off that second wide receiver on the opposing team. And now you bring in a guy like Xavier McKinney, allow him to sit back there, contribute, obviously, in both run and pass defense, and then it gives you the flexibility with Julian Love to potentially step down in. So now you have Beal and you have Love. You can think about some of those other players that we've taken these last couple of years that maybe haven't panned out at the slot position. So now you have a nice group of players in the secondary that situationally can give you some really good weapons. And if the Giants can just be effective defensively this year, we've talked about this before on the podcast, if they can go from being arguably one of the worst teams in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball, sub 30, right? If they can push themselves towards the 20th best defense in the league, now you can talk about an opportunity potentially for this offense to go out there and make some noise and maybe move the needle in terms of wins and losses. Going to be a ton of competition for them in the upcoming season. The schedule is not going to be great for them. Taking on, well, actually, you know what? We'll do that before we get out the door here as the Colts selection at 41 now comes in. Let's go ahead and just briefly take a look at the New York Giants 2020 opponents. And that'll give us a sense of how difficult it's going to be for them to move the needle. Remember, we've already seen the Dallas Cowboys take a wide receiver. The Philadelphia Eagles take a wide receiver. The Washington Redskins went ahead and got themselves a nice player in Chase Young at the top of the draft, as we all know. So Jonathan Taylor goes here to the Indianapolis Colts. So another running back will come off the board. I will share my screen here briefly with you. Let's go ahead and take a look at this schedule coming up here for the New York Football Giants. So, home games. You're talking about the Cardinals. They've added an offensive weapon. We'll get to see the player that could have been ours in Isaiah Simmons. San Francisco 49ers obviously added weapons here in this draft as well. Super Bowl runner-up. The Cleveland Browns, we just mentioned how they've rebuilt that offensive line now between free agency and this draft early. Then you get a team like the Steelers, I think always a difficult opponent, and though it's at home, still going to be a tough one there. Then you get the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Who doesn't know about what they've done so far this offseason and early in this draft? And then you get into the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Washington Redskins. So when you talk about trying to win some of these games, listen, will the Cardinals defense be better now with Simmons? Certainly, but it's going to be about can you outshoot them in that game. 49ers, very difficult matchup. I can say again, maybe when you take a look at the Browns, can you win a shootout potentially? Likewise for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Likewise for the Dallas Cowboys, for the Philadelphia Eagles. Even the Washington Redskins, depending on what they do over the course of this draft, are going to be a team that you're going to have to at least contend with. So, out of our home games, if I want to say that the Washington Redskins should be a win, fantastic. I can put the Cardinals into that mixed area and maybe even the Steelers, depending on how they look coming out of this draft. But those are the only 3, and I'll put the Bucs in there as well, certainly. You have 4 games out of the first 8 they were looking at in the home schedule side of things that you feel like are winnable games. But if you went 3 of those, you'd still feel good. The other one, San Francisco, Dallas, Eagles. Now we're at home against those teams, and I get that. But those are going to be hard matchups and difficult ones for the Giants to win, including, of course, the Cleveland Browns as well. So you could be talking about a 3-5 record at home, and I think you'd actually have to really like that given the opposition that's listed here. On the flip side of things, when you go into the away games, obviously the Baltimore Ravens are going to be a battle. The Cincinnati Bengals, all of a sudden with Joe Burrow, then they get him a weapon in T. Higgins. We'll see that player there. So a very different looking team is going to be on the field for them this upcoming season. LA Rams, no slouch, only a couple years removed from some deep playoff runs. Then the Seattle Seahawks, we know about Russ Wilson. The Bears coming off a down year. And then the divisional matchups, Dallas, Eagles, and Washington. It's hard to say that you're going to sweep a team in the division, but even if you want to lock up the Washington Redskins win, if you want to say the LA Rams have taken a little bit of a step back, sure. But again, can you lock in a win against the Cincinnati Bengals now? There's a very unknown there, right? Ravens going to be a difficult matchup. I don't think you're getting that W. Seattle, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, I think you would say that if you want to put the Bengals, the Rams, and the Redskins into these winnable game categories, with the other 5 being very much toss-up / maybe you lean on the side of a loss, you're talking about really 3-5 records on both sides of the home and away. And from that, 6-10 would feel nice, right? 6-10 with an opportunity to compete in some games. And again, depending on what else we do here, right? Do we get a weapon on the offensive side? Do we continue to flesh out the linebacker core on the defensive side of the ball? That being the case, friends, we're going to go ahead and close out our coverage here in the short term. As we highlight here, they are now at the 41st pick with the Jaguars making their selection. They only have 3 defensive starters from their 2017 AFC Championship appearance, interestingly enough. We'll come back in as the third round is getting underway and starting to move along a little bit. We'll also, of course, keep you present. You can follow us on Twitter. And if some news breaks the Giants are making a move towards the top of the third round, obviously we will come in immediately and cover all of that action as well. On behalf of Andy Makowitz and myself, Adam Marbeck, thanks for checking in with us here on Sportscaster. New York Football Giants secure the offensive tackle in round 1 and get a valuable defensive weapon, a top 20 talent in the NFL draft at the 36th pick overall, and Xavier McKinney in the 2nd. We will be back in a little bit later on with continuing coverage of the 2020 NFL Draft.